Did you see that one? Yeah.
Welcome to tonight's Envision Yountville Town Advisory Group meeting. And we'll move forward and start with the roll call.
Great. Member Pena?
Here.
Member Hudson?
Here.
Member Santos?
Here.
Member Johnson?
Here.
Member Diver McAvoy?
Here.
Member Chalmers?
Here.
Member Bradigam?
Here.
Vice Chair Dennington? Here. Chair Knight?
Here.
Let the record show that Member Wickers is excused and that all members will be voting members tonight if a vote is needed.
Thank you. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So the fourth item is adoption of the agenda. Are there any requests from the committee or from staff for changes to the agenda? Seeing no comments, is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Motion and a second.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Item 5 is, that's a reminder for me, to check our phones, be sure their ringers are off. It's okay. Item 5 is public comment on items not on the agenda. So this is a point in the meeting for members in the audience that have an item they'd like to address to this group, that an item that doesn't appear on the agenda tonight. Are there any public comment? Seeing none, I'll close public comment and we'll move on to the administrative and regular items of the agenda. So the first item is discussion and adoption of the draft general plan vision statement. Is there a short comments from staff?
Just want to explain what the attachment is that you're looking at. It's a two-sided. One of them has the proposed vision statements that we discussed at the last meeting, and the other side is the submitted one from the ad hoc committee most recently after the discussion of our last TAG meeting. So with that, if the ad hoc committee wants to share anything, they can, or if the TAG just wants to start discussion on it, it's up to you.
So I think what we'll do is we'll take maybe some short comments from the subcommittee that prepared the statement, and then as we've done in previous meetings, we'll just open up for a brief public comment or for public comment on this item, and then we'll bring it back to for discussion to the group. So report from the committee?
Sure. So we got together and tried to do our best to blend the initial with thoughts from the additional members of the subcommittee. And what you have here is something that the entire group seemed pleased with. So that's it.
No other comments, Carl? And
I agree with everything she said.
Can I ask a question?
let's just get some comments from the subcommittee, and then we'll ask questions. Erlen, do you have any comments that you participated?
No, I think there was a lot of good work done in putting it together. I think we were under the assumption, it might not have been a correct assumption, that the last paragraph on the first page that was there was going to be on a different page or something, and that this would, so what we were talking about was on this particular statement that's on here is something that would be the vision statement on a different page.
Okay.
But other than that, I thought people did a good job in putting it together.
And the other member, Davio, did you?
Just thanking PJ for really pulling it all together for us. So it seems fine to me.
Good. Okay. Questions of the group?
I was just wondering who made up the committee, but it sounds like we've heard from all of them, so now I know.
There was 4 members. We kept it under a Brown Act number that was legal, and so and they met from after our last meeting and before this one, so. Are there any other questions from the group here now?
I'm just trying to clarify what Berlin said. So is this general plan vision, the one that we're looking at, the first portion? Because there was a discussion about having a second part as well. Am I wrong on that? Or?
Yeah, the thing listed on the back page
Yes.
will be on, I guess, on a page in the book that says vision statement. And the thing that at the bottom here that people talked about, looking like a beginning of a book, a storybook maybe, was going to be put on a separate page, I guess. But I did some research with other towns or resort-based towns and or tourist-based towns, and found their vision statements, and they had a combination of two kinds of things. One, a more descriptive, picturesque statement, and then the nuts and bolts statement of key features. And I think we did that with those two statements.
Okay. Maybe we'll bring it back to a moment, but first maybe what I'll do is I'll open up a public comment. Is there any comments from the public on the vision statement? Go ahead, Pam.
Pam Reeves, 6887 Jefferson Street. I just picked up this sheet as I walked through the door, and as I read it, I was a little bit taken aback by how much emphasis there is on second home ownership, and that is kind of one of our major problems in this town. And I feel like calling it out in our vision statement is a little bit, I don't know, not reinforcing of what we're hoping for Yountville to have more full-time residents or more of a normal community. So I have some suggestions. The first sentence, uniquely special community, I think we should choose one word to describe it. Unique would be great because you could use special later on. And instead of we're comprised, how about we're a community of long-term residents, veteran homes residents, and part-time residents. Strike who enjoy Yountville as a second home, and visitors, keep and visitors. Strike many of whom aspire one day to call Yountville home. And then just say we are proud of our town and are enthusiastic in welcoming visitors. Makes it shorter, more succinct, without the nod to second homeowners, which I think we all feel a little bit worried about. When we say part-time residents, that takes them into account. And visitors, we know we have visitors. So I feel like Yountville is a unique, special community. We are a community of long-term residents, veterans home residents, part-time residents, and visitors. We are proud of our town and enthusiastic in welcoming visitors. Oh, actually, I was going to suggest after visitors, all of whom appreciate the special qualities of town. And then say, we are proud of our town. And then I also would encourage you to change the order of the bulleted points to reflect the last one as number 1, the second to the last one as number 2, the third one as number 3. So switch the order from top to bottom, because you're expressing this embracing the future, respecting our heritage, and committing to sustainability. That should be our priority. That is who we really are. And then we are committed to protecting our scenic environment and enjoying our parks, which is also something that was expressed in all of the meetings as part of who we are. And then the geography, that we're a world-renowned destination, yes, that's true, but it's not what makes us a community. And the same thing for the tourist-based economy. That's a result of who we are as a community. And I feel like that belongs at the end. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Yeah. Are there any other comments from the public? Hearing none, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing on this discussion. So I just want to go back real briefly to, and we can address, maybe the committee can address comments from either the public comments or your own comments, that and it's really, Lynn, it's really up to the committee in terms of, I mean, I know we talked about it last time, and I would support the idea of potentially this statement as a vision statement, and what I like about it is it really speaks to someone that reads our document 5 years from now, or 15 years from now, or 20 years from now, of not only a description of our community, but the challenges and the contrast that we have and that we addressed here, and that I think future councils will address. But I also support the idea of the other wording in some form of a place in the document as a preface, kind of a vision of the community as many people see it now, but and as both statements finding a place in our larger general plan. But that's really up to the that's what I support. That's really up to the committee. There are our suggestions and the committee support. So, hearing are there other comments from the committee?
I guess I'll start. Thank you, Pam, for your comments. I agree. I think that there needs to be some finesse with the first paragraph. I also think that it's nice to mention part-time residents, but one of the things that we've talked about here at this committee, and I know throughout the community as well, is our emphasis on full-time residents and how important that is, and that is reflected in our rental ordinances, et cetera. So I thought that was a great point. So I think if we could work with staff to finesse a couple of things in that first paragraph, I'm on board with supporting this new vision statement. I commend the committee for taking all the feedback from all the different suggestions that we got and really boiling it down to this. I also liked the committee's suggestion about incorporating the book paragraph as a second page within the general plan. I think that's a nice idea. And I'm fine with keeping the bullet points as is or flipping them as has been suggested.
Okay.
I wanted to, I'll agree with Whitney. I don't know that we want to get into wordsmithing again. I think we're really close. I think some of the suggestions that Pam had, thank you, Pam, are really good. I think we should move forward. I think it's close.
Are there any comments from the subcommittee that put this together? They're kind of your feelings about suggestions that have been presented so far tonight?
Yeah, I will comment. I think Pam had a couple of good suggestions, and I think that there's a few things we can do with this first paragraph, maybe to shore that up and make it a little bit, less wordy. But I do feel that I kind of like the order and what we have in all of the bullet points, because I think we also kind of have to be real in terms of these are the challenges that we have and the things that we're trying to balance. And tourism is a huge part of our community and our culture here. So I don't think that that we should try to shy away from stating that.
Other comments?
So I totally concur with what PJ said. I don't mind wordsmithing the first paragraph a little. It's fine to me the way it is. The one comment I will make is regarding second homes. They are a part of this community, and I think 20 years from now, they will be a part of this community. I actually am one of the minority, I guess, that I see second homes as a strength, not a weakness. because many second home buyers end up being full-time residents. I have that on first-hand knowledge. I'm one of them. After 1 year, I said, I'm moving. So I think we should acknowledge that second homeowners are a legitimate member of our community and not just ignore them.
Any other comments?
Yeah, thank you. I think those are good, legitimate comments on your behalf. Personally, I just think that if we had 10 people here, 10 people would look at this and they would identify what they see as their version of this. So while I have no issue whatsoever with changing any of this, I still think that, perhaps speaking to you, and I do appreciate you coming here and talking to us, helps me, that everybody will find their own way to speak their own language about how they see this town, and I think you just did. And so I think this captures, though, kind of the spirit of this town, with changes or not, because in listening to you, you mostly supported this. You just wanted certain things moved here and there and used a different choice of words. So I feel like since I was on that committee, I at least owe my explanation to you, and that's what it is. I just think we would all look at this in our own language, but that you saw this basically the same way tells me it's probably okay. So.
Okay. Other comments from the group? And then we haven't spent a lot of time on this. Does everyone, maybe it'd be good for everyone just to, we've heard from most people. Joel, do you have any comments or?
I'm comfortable the way it is.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you, Pam, for your comments. As Whitney said, I could see a value at some point of flipping the bullet points, but I think the fact I'm not sure necessarily I mean I believe you're right. You could take an emphasis by flipping the bullet points. Could put an emphasis on community first and tourism as our economy, but not the first item. It's up to the committee. I think the fact I'm less concerned about the order. I can see a value for maybe doing a flip, but Whitney suggested that, but it's not an issue. I think the fact that all the issues are there, it addresses our feelings about the community. In terms of the issue of the second home, I guess I might agree more with Carl that I think that it's a reality in the community that we have a lot of second home people. And from my experience, I think in the last 20 years or more, a lot of people did come to the community, bought a second home, and rented them out, and then eventually became full-time residents. What concerns me is not that people are buying second homes. It concerns me at a meeting when the council 2 or 3 months ago was reviewing rental policy and how to keep track of rents and setting up a process to monitor the rentals in town, is that there was a number of people that stood up and honestly said they're in town buying property to basically rent them as basically defeating our 30-day policy and renting them out longer than 30 days for Airbnb or something like that. And that is an issue that significantly concerns me, that the town's policy should be to do whatever we can to reduce or eliminate that as can be in a process where government gets involved in the market. So I'm okay with the Yountville with people that buy second homes. It's become more and more prevalent, but we have a long history of people buying homes and living, and then eventually coming to live here. So I'm generally comfortable with this statement, and I also support having Verlin's other statement in the document as a preface or something, because I think This addresses the challenges. It talks about the community. It'll be in the statement as the beginning of how this committee looked at our challenges and looked at the general plan, but the other statement is a reflection of our community as today as we see it. So,
And as we want to see it in the future.
Yeah,
Because
that's true.
what we want is to keep it the same.
right. So 15 or 20 years ago, you're correct. That's correct. As someone is looking at the challenges, but seeing what was there at the time we wrote this document and our efforts to keep it the same way. Thank you.
Yeah, just one more thing, and Pam, I do appreciate always your comments and you coming. You're one of the few people that comes, and that is appreciated. For me, on the, like I said, I'm comfortable with it is. To me, the bullet points, and this maybe is based on how I do business, but to me, the last one, instead of being first, is important to be last because that's what you're left with. That's the last thing you read. And to me, that's the most important point. And to me, leaving it at the end, I feel is that's the last thing that somebody will read. So that's where my thinking is. So
I agree with you on that.
Good. Are there other comments? Is there a motion before us to consider?
I move the vision statement as presented be adopted.
So just to clarify what as presented means, it means the bottom paragraph on the one page to be kind of that introduction one, and then the one on the back as well, right? Is that?
One is the vision, one is a description of the community. You can put them one front, one second, one for flip them around.
But the motion is to incorporate both of them into the general plan.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
that's what I mean.
Yes.
If you I think that's the main thing. If you accept that, our motion is really to adopt both of them in the document. But I guess the wordsmithing of that document is in process, and so I think I'm open to letting staff figure out a way to put them in a place that they both speak to the document's best reading.
Yes.
So we have a motion on the table. If staff understands the motion as we defined it. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion, a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you, everyone. Thank you for all the time that the subcommittee spent on this. It's difficult and process, but I think we brought to the table and for council to consider a beautiful and very accurate statements of our community. So thank you. Okay, so let's move on to the second item under regular items, which is the discussion of the housing policy.
Yes, good evening, Chair Knight and members of the TAG. So we're going to pick up where we left off last month, which was a review of the housing element. And so I just kind of wanted to start with a background about what a housing element is and what's involved in the housing element. The housing element, of course, is one of 7 required elements, and it's been a part of the general plan. It's been required since 1969. It's also the most heavily regulated of all of the elements. This one in particular, whenever it's revised and adopted, it has to be reviewed and certified by the State Department of Housing and Community Development, and it's kind of a long back and forth process with HCD. The housing element used to have to be updated every 5 years, and as you know, our general plan timeline is usually about every 15 to 20 years. Recently, in the last housing element cycle, the state decided to provide an option for some communities to go on an 8-year schedule, and Yountville did qualify for that. So now the next housing element will be updated. It's an 8-year cycle. So the current housing element was adopted in January of 2015, and so it's now valid through the year 2022, the end of the year. So a new one will be adopted in the beginning of 2023, which actually is only 5 years away now. So there's quite a few requirements for a housing There has to be, and all of that's in that housing element is required. There has to be a very detailed evaluation of the current housing element, all the policies and programs that are in it, what's been achieved. There has to be a detailed demographic and housing need analysis, also looking at affordability levels and how much housing costs, how much rentals are, and what the affordability gap is for the different income levels. The element has to analyze the different constraints on housing development, and these can be governmental constraints as well as non-governmental constraints, just like the cost of financing and the cost of actually the building, the housing. And there has to be a very detailed site inventory, which is a parcel by parcel listing of all of the sites that are available to accommodate the housing need. And that can be sites that are vacant or sites that are underutilized, meaning that they either could be, they could accommodate more housing, or they could be rezoned in order to accommodate housing in addition to like commercial use. And then finally, there has to be programs that will promote housing opportunities and meet the regional housing needs allocation, or what we call RHNA for short. And that's a big part of the housing element. So I want to talk a little bit about what RHNA is. So RHNA, first of all, it addresses these different income categories. And the income categories are different for different communities. For each county will have its own schedule. It changes every year. This is the most recent one for Napa County. And this, what I'm showing you here, is what these income categories are for a 4-person household. That's usually kind of the middle, but there's different income categories for 1 person, 2 person, 3 person, all the way up to 8 people in a household. So a very low income is up to 50% of the median. The median's $91,000. So for a very low income, family of 4, making up to $47,000 is considered very low income. Low income is the next rung up, so that's 50 to 80% of median. So that's a family of 4 that makes between $47,000 and $74,000. Moderate income is a household income of $74,000 to $109,000, and then above moderate income is anything over $109,000. So the RHNA. And the RHNA numbers themselves actually come through a pretty complicated process that starts at the state level, where they look at what the population projections are, the employment projections, and just kind of the overall need for housing. And then that is distributed to the different regional areas, and ABAG is our region, the Association of Bay Area Governments. And then ABAG distributes that overall number to the individual cities and towns and counties. So the RHNA that was given to Yountville at the beginning of this housing cycle, starting in the year 2014, is for 4 units affordable to low-income households, 2 affordable to very low, 2 affordable to low, 3 affordable to moderate, and 8 affordable to above moderate income. Now, it's important to recognize that the town, I should say, is not actually responsible for building any of this housing, but they do have to make sure that there are sites available that are adequate to accommodate these different enough units at these various income levels. So let's talk a little bit about the way that the housing element approached how it was going to meet its RHNA. And what the tables, and these are coming from the tables in the housing element, basically what the tables are doing is they're lumping together the low and very low income and the moderate and above moderate income. So the low and very low combined are 6 units, and the moderate and above moderate income are 11 units. And they do this because oftentimes kind of the multifamily is what's satisfied with the low and very low, and then the moderate and above moderate income can generally be certainly the above moderate or single family homes. But a lot of moderate can come from second units or apartment units, so above kind of market rate apartment units. So that's why they're usually separated in this way. The low and very low income are generally only achieved by having some kind of a restriction or a requirement on a development to actually have deed restricted units included in the development. So this is what was required. Now, the housing element had identified projects that were already approved, and one of these is, I'll show you on the next slide, is the Vineyard Oaks project. So those approved projects, which were already in the pipeline when the housing element was adopted, showed that there were 2 units that would be affordable to low and very low income, and 19 units affordable to moderate and above moderate income. Yes, do you have a question, Joe?
Yeah, are all these based on a family of 4?
So these are not based, the income categories themselves are the only
Just the
thing.
income categories.
Yeah, but that
Okay.
for a family of 4, but these can be, so if you develop a deed restricted income, a unit, for example, that the requirement is that it's affordable to a very low income household. Well, when the households come and put in their application for that, they're going to be qualified based on their household size and their household income. And so as long as they make it under that threshold and meet the very low. Sure. Okay, so the approved projects here are identified in those green, I don't know if you can see them very well, but they're the green parcels. And the largest one, and I can't do that, right, it doesn't work. The largest one is the Vineyard Oaks. And the Vineyard Oaks, when it was, it doesn't show up, when the Vineyard Oaks, oh, thank you, right. I've got my little arrow here. I have to do what? Oh, it blows a pointer. Okay, sorry. I should remember these. Here, this is right here is the Vineyard Oaks parcel or project. And that project alone had 16 units, with 1 affordable to very low income, 1 to low, and 2 affordable to moderate income. There's a multi-unit building in that project. In addition to that, there were other approved projects at the time. There were 3 single-family homes, a second unit, and 1 mixed-use apartment. So when we look at, and that was what had been approved at the time. Now we've just, the units actually that have been built up to now are those 2 low and very low, and there's actually been 23 units of moderate and above moderate income that have been built since the housing element was approved. So that means that our remaining RENA, we've actually satisfied all of the moderate and above moderate income. I think there's 1 moderate income left, but that's been satisfied. And then the remaining RENA, which we're really concerned about, are just these 4 units for very low and low income that have to be, that we'd like to make sure are accommodated by the end of the housing element period, by 2022. So how are we going to do that? Well, the housing element first looks at underutilized land. And all of the underutilized land, the assumption was that the units that could be produced on that were going to be affordable to moderate and above moderate income. Those are identified here in the yellow parcels. Essentially, there's 5 sites. They're all located in single-family residential district, and they have existing housing units, but they could accommodate more. And my understanding is that some of these sites have actually already been developed or have approved some additional housing. So the underutilized sites don't get us to where we need to go for accommodating that low and very low income need. So the next thing, the housing element looks at vacant land and does identify 2 sites that have capacity to provide 18 units affordable to low and very low income. So these 2 sites, the first one that we have is here, which is the Catholic Church parcel. And the assumption here is that there would be 18 units could be accommodated on this parcel, and the housing element says that those were going to, because it is in a floodplain, that they could be accommodated in a portion of that site that is out of the floodplain. I'm not sure that's true with the current FEMA maps, but let's go with what's in the housing element, 18 units, and the assumption here is that 3 of those units would be affordable to lower income. So that's 3 units of our 4. The other units were assumed that they would be accommodated on the French Laundry Garden site. Now this site here is actually zoned primary commercial, but it does have the affordable housing overlay, which could be used if the developer so chose. And then, so the assumption here, or the calculation, was that that site could accommodate 15 units affordable to lower income households, but only if the developer chooses to make use of that affordable housing overlay. our understanding, and I think it's been in the news, it's not going to come as a surprise to anybody, that the French Laundry is actually looking at developing this site with a hotel. So there's a chance, a significant chance that this site may not end up having any housing on any affordable units built on it. If that is the case, then that site goes away, and there's only this one site which with the 3 units that's been identified on it to accommodate the rest of the arena. That becomes an issue, and the problem is because there is a state housing law it's known as the no net loss provision. And that requires that the town has to identify additional sites for lower income housing, lower meaning low and very low. If a site is developed, the remaining identified lower income housing potential is not enough to accommodate the remaining arena, which is what would happen if that French Laundry Garden site was developed with just commercial use and had no lower income housing units available there. If that happens, then when the town goes to approve a development on the French Laundry Garden site, the town would also at the same time, in their required findings that they make when they approve development, the town would have to identify additional adequate and available sites that could accommodate that remaining housing need. And the town would have 180 days in order to rezone an appropriate site in order to accommodate that housing.
I have a question, maybe while we're in context of this particular or you're talking about the French Laundry site. I thought at some point in the past when there was an approval for an inn that there was a requirement for that property because of the loss of some homes on that property to provide affordable housing behind ad hoc, and the town made some dollar commitments to that affordable housing. Is that requirement no longer required for that property?
Well, let me first share that there is indeed a history with this parcel, and they had received approval for lodging, and associated with that was the rezone of the property that triggered replacement housing elsewhere. So if that had been developed, they were required to build so many units, and they chose the ad hoc parcel to accommodate it. It's true that the town contributed money to that effort, and in the end it was never constructed. Since that wasn't achieved through this achieved at the time it was rezoned, it's earmarked to follow that property should be redeveloped in the future.
Right, so if that requirement still follows with the property in terms of some form of address of that issue, or
yes,
okay,
and it's a replacement housing requirement.
Right, okay, that's fine. All right, thank you.
Okay. I had a question. It's my understanding that the North Block Hotel has at least one, maybe more, low-income residential units.
They have 4 residential units in addition to the hotel rooms, 2 of which are restricted to affordable households.
So if the French Laundry Garden site was developed into some kind of lodging, could that take place there as well, and then that would fulfill the requirement?
Yes, so lodging properties select different ways of satisfying what is an in lieu fee for housing, affordable housing that is imposed on the development. And the North Block project decided or elected to have those constructed on site. Other properties pay an in lieu fee, which is very pricey, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's a choice they make whether to accommodate it on site with very limited space or to pay the in lieu fee. The in lieu fee, however, does not satisfy the state requirements to accommodate land that is zoned and appropriate for housing.
The Catholic Church property, you had the numbers of the 8 or the 3 affordable. Can that number change?
Well,
Can more be accommodated in that property?
Potentially, it is certainly large enough to accommodate additional housing. It was identified as 3 as a realistic number, so then to go back and revise that would have to be it's not just a simple thing to do. But the bigger issue about that property is that it's been now, I think, in at least 2 housing elements, and it hasn't been developed. And there is a floodplain, as we know, on the property, and that's a real constraint. And so the question then becomes, is that site truly adequate and available for housing if it hasn't been developed? And that question would have to be dealt with.
Affordable in lieu of the other income.
I'm sorry?
Can they do more affordable housing in lieu of mid or upper income housing
At that site.
at that site? Can those numbers be?
I'll jump in. So
Okay, thank you.
whenever there is a housing development of 5 or more homes or 5 or more parcels, the town's inclusionary housing ordinance comes into effect, and that requires that a minimum percentage of 15% of the units be constructed for low-income households. There are additional density bonuses that are granted from 20 to 25% affordable, and when those are granted, the single family or the market rate dwellings are permitted at a higher FAR. So generally that's about 25%. It can be bumped up to about 40%. That's how we saw the Vineyard Oaks property develop. We obtained 4, which I think was 2 more than the number required for inclusionary housing.
Steve Rogers, Town Manager. Just to add a little more background and history on what would be a unique constraint for this particular property. One of the biggest reasons it hasn't been developed is the property owner, much like the property owner in the north end of town with the ag parcel, isn't interested in development. It is owned by the Catholic Church. They have a soft spot for affordable housing, so I do want to say that the potential, and I think the town would be able to work very successfully in explaining why it's logical to keep it in our zoning mix. But when you talk about a real constraint, the parish does not have an abundance of extra money. The site is a costly site to develop. It probably, with the right funding partners, some nonprofits could actually house a very large nonprofit-based affordable unit, but again, that's going to require a whole lot of resources more than the church currently has. But I just want to say, when Christine is mentioning you some ratios, we're usually talking about the ratios that are used when a private developer with typical financing, land costs, what they can afford to do when they set aside for affordability. So the flip side, though, is if we were able to find a boatload of money, this site potentially could house a lot of affordable housing. Or it could go through another cycle or 2 and look an awful lot like it currently is, with the ag use being done on that and a nominal amount of revenue coming to the church for that. So I just wanted to say, parcels have unique histories and constraints, and that's one there. And again, it was mentioned it's in the floodplain, so adding to the flood wall or building up. So it has it's not the first place a lot of affordable housing projects go look. They look for easy to build locations rather than complicated ones.
I have a question about the net loss. Is it true that as that property, the Catholic Church property, is identified on the current housing element, and then the next one will occur at 2023, the next one 8 years after that, does the state at some point look at the town or look at the plan and say, there's nothing happening here? You're no longer getting credit for that? Is that an issue?
Yeah, and that's a new state law also, so it's going to be a lot more difficult, because that is true for a lot of towns and cities, that they keep relying on these sites that really aren't feasible and just keep getting rolled over. So there is a new requirement that if a site's been in a housing element for 2 consecutive housing elements, if it's been on that inventory, that the town is going to have to justify why it is actually feasible to develop it. And there's going to be some additional, and I don't know exactly what they are, but there's going to be some additional reporting requirements around that.
And how many cycles has that been in?
That I don't know.
I'm not sure if the Catholic Church has been in two, but I think it may have been.
Okay, so there's a potential that during, for the next, in the next cycle, that it may become an issue to where,
Yes.
not that it wouldn't be included, but there would be some additional justification or.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
And if in fact it was rejected by the state as inventory, then the
Then
town would be in a pickle because
Then the town would
they would
need
have
to
a
find
loss
it.
of inventory and would need to find it somewhere else.
Yes, the town would have to find an additional site.
Thank you.
Christine, I have a question. We talked earlier about mixed residential and commercial on Washington Street. So is it possible if those, like a business below and apartment or something above, can that be considered as part of this going forward?
Yes, that could be. Now, it's not going to be specifically spelled out in the housing element because I haven't quite gotten to that part of my presentation, but we don't want to make any changes to the housing element. But yes, it would be additional housing potential. Those units, the assumption is that they would be affordable, they would be market rate of units and probably affordable to moderate income households. Now, when I say that that's an assumption, when the town does its annual housing progress report and it identifies what all the new units that have been issued building permits and what the affordability level is of those units, if they're deed restricted, then they know that it's going to be required to be affordable to a certain level, income level. But if it's a market rate unit, the town can actually look at what the rental is for that unit, and then justify a specific income level based on a market rate. So that's one way that the town could use, like second units or those kinds of apartments. So I'm saying that the assumption is that it would be affordable to moderate income, and it probably what the rents are here in Yountville, that it wouldn't be at market rate affordable to a lower income household.
Thanks.
I have a question. I think it was recently I read that the California veterans or the state veterans have expressed an interest in affordable housing on the veterans' home property for staff or whatever. So the California Veterans Home or the State Veterans Administration has expressed an interest, but does the state housing departments only count affordable housing provided on private property? Is it possible at some point they would allow a city to count possible affordable housing on a state property? Or
That if the units were built on the veterans' home property, it would count towards the town's RENA. And I know in the master plan, I think it was something like 149 or 160. I mean, there were a lot of units that they were talking about. That would be wonderful. All of your problems would be solved in that case. But yeah, do you want to say so? I was just going to say that the town, however, can't assume, because the town doesn't have any regulatory authority over the veterans home, they can't assume, push the units onto the veterans home and assume that they'll be accommodated there.
I understand they can't assume, you can't assume on private property either it's going to occur. I mean, so anyway, at least like on the Vineyard, the Catholic Church property. So
Well, we have different periods that we need to report to the state, and the last time was in 2015 when we adopted our current housing element. The next time will be in 2023 for the next cycle. And at that time, you have to demonstrate that you have sufficient land that is zoned for residential use. And that's what this map indicates, whether it's already approved, whether it's underutilized and it's residentially zoned, or whether it has a housing overlay or other element that would allow it to develop. So it's a what if based on land conditions. Then during the course of the housing element, there have to, a certain number of parcels need to remain available. So we're discussing this example where the French Laundry may fall out of play, and then we can demonstrate we meet 3 but not 4 of the affordable housing that are identified in the housing element, so we'd have to address that. But then once a year, we also report to the state on the housing that we've achieved over the course of a year. And so if we were able to gain any units at the veterans home, could be counted at that time, but it's unlikely that it would be counted earlier when we're adopting the housing element because it's not land that's under our zoning authority.
And the housing on the property now that's supplied to people that work, and there are residences, some very old on the property, those aren't counted towards any housing count or affordable housing currently, I
No,
assume.
and the only time we really count units is at the moment of construction or at the completion of construction.
This is a good segue to explain how various parts of the general plan you're working on all play in. And I say that because this is a reasonable question to ask in Yountville, which is, if we have space, what place does the Veterans Home ground place? Having been up in Sacramento recently and talking with the Veterans Home, because the town has taken steps to actively encourage the Veterans Home, state, and others to look at the development. It can be very frustrating in terms of, because we see something that seems so simple, and I want to bring you back to some of the policies that you've adopted. If you remember, we had the discussion with the 5 or 6 Veterans Home related policies. So one of those in there reflects that the town supports and will work with the Veterans Home on the master plan, and it will probably be a new master plan at some point up there. But we do think that there's an opportunity for a number of things up there, but as Sandra and Christine are saying, the challenge we have is this other arm of the state says you have to deal with that which you have land use zoning jurisdiction, and that is the one thing we do not have at the state. So, but I do want to tie in because I think it's important that you all understand the connection back to that policy about why we're interested in having an ongoing relationship and supporting the development on the Veterans Home, and why that's important when we put this general plan together, that we've emphasized that as you went over. So I just thought it was timely to bring the two together. And if we were successful, you have right now, we have 900 employees that work at the Veterans Home. So, I mean, it would be a real positive thing in Napa County if there was a mixed-use type of residential housing development. So the town council feels very strongly on that, and it's something we're continuing to work, but we don't have the ability to dictate.
Just a quick question about what type of information you're looking, I know this is more maybe informative. Are you looking for any comments from the committee, or is there anything on this discussion tonight?
On the housing discussion? Yeah. And I was just going to get to that.
Okay.
Shall I wrap it up?
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so with all of that said, it's staff's recommendation that we don't make any changes to the housing element. It's, again, a very long process to make any changes. It has to go back to HCD, and the housing element is going to have to be completely revised in 5 years anyway. We also think that the policies and programs that are in the housing element now are very good and actually don't need to be revised. The one program is this one about it's referred to here as the Palissa property, is that North Agricultural Parcel. And if there is any interest in rezoning this, a part of this at some point in the future for housing, this is the one program that we would say that we would recommend revising. Which brings me back to the North Agricultural Parcel. So I just kind of wanted to remind the TAG where we are with this parcel. The TAG did have a discussion about considering rezoning that parcel to allow mixed residential development, open space, and parks. And when the TAG voted on it, it did not support the program, 4-5. And but as we mentioned at the last meeting, we were going to bring this forward because it was such a close vote, and it's, well, kind of controversial, not controversial, but it was a close vote. So we wanted to bring it to the ZDRB to get their feedback. The ZDRB is actually in favor of mixed residential zoning on this parcel, at least for a small parcel. There were 3 commissioners, board members there at that meeting. So it was a 3-0 vote. But they recommended that the town consider a smaller area for housing, and they really wanted to maintain the view corridor. So we went back and we kind of drew up this idea as a smaller area. So this here is going to preserve, and they were concerned not just this view corridor, which is an established view corridor coming off in this direction, but also just the views of the hills when you're driving down Yountville Cross Road. So we went back to the drawing board and came up with this idea, which is to just have these 2 smaller parcels, and these are about 3 acres each for a total of 6 acres. And these would, they're developed on the grid scale, like the rest of the town here, and they could be developed separately as well. 1 3-acre could be developed, and then the other 3-acre could be developed. So the ZDRB was, again, they're in favor of this mixed residential zoning, and that is for 8 to 10 dwelling units per gross acre, up to 25 units with the affordable housing overlay. The requirements here, 50% have to be reserved for single-family dwellings, a minimum of 25% have to be multifamily dwellings, and then there is the inclusionary regulation, so because there's more than 5 units, 15% of them have to be affordable. So, so overall, if we were going to consider rezoning this, just the smaller area, the 6 acres, that would accommodate 40 single-family homes and 20 multifamily units. With that 15% requirement, 9 of those would be affordable units, so that would backfill any loss at the French Garden site, but also it could be used to accommodate future housing needs. So the 2017 projections are for an additional 20 new housing units by 2040. Now these projections are updated every 3 years, so we don't know what it's going to be when it's time to redo the housing element. But if there was a requirement for 20 additional housing units, that means it's usually about 40% are for lower income, so there would be a requirement for 7 to 8 affordable lower income units. So just wanted to bring that all up with this idea that we could still designate a portion of the parcel. We were thinking about, staff had this idea of designating it as housing reserve on the land use map. That would allow the existing agricultural use to continue, but it would just kind of send the signal that this site, or at least these 6 acres, perhaps a smaller area of the site, is going to be is slated for future housing, to accommodate future housing development if there is a need. It also just creates an opportunity for additional housing consistent with the intent of the county's agricultural preserve. Again, the idea here is just to designate the land as housing reserve on the land use map, but then to have a program in the housing element that says consider rezoning these 6 acres to allow mixed residential development, and that would be done sometime in the future. So if the town wanted to approve development at the French Garden site that was just commercial and didn't have the housing, and the town needed to find a site in order to accommodate no net loss, and had 180 days to do it, at least at this point, going through this process, the community could weigh in and say, well, this is potentially a site that could be used to accommodate that, to address that need. Or if when it's time to revise the housing element in 2022, which is before this, the general plan will be at the end of its life, there is, again, a site that could be looked at that time, and has already kind of been blessed by the community as a potential place, site to accommodate housing. So I know the TAG has already voted on this. We don't mean to necessarily kind of redo that vote, but I just wanted to make sure that you were, as we said, we brought it to the ZDRB. We brought this forward to the council. Also, we had a council study session a couple of weeks ago. They didn't make any decision on it, but we're going to be bringing this idea also back to the community at that workshop that we're going to have in April. Just to kind of, so I wanted to make sure that you kind of thought about this in the context now that we've gone through the housing element and all the requirements of the housing element and RENA, to make sure that you had kind of the complete picture of what's going on with this parcel and our need for housing.
Can I make one comment on that? When it's presented in the next public forum, it seemed like last time when it was presented in the public forum, a lot of people that I heard from thought we were saying we are going to develop that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole different thing than this is offering the potential if it ever becomes available. And I don't know if that was effectively communicated to the public when it was presented in the last community. So maybe we can word it to where everybody understands that.
I think that's a really good point. But I think at that land use meeting, at the workshop, we really were kind of just throwing all ideas on the table, and now we're kind of refining them as we're going through this process. So the idea is that when we go back and we have our next community workshop, now we're going to be presenting more of the refined ideas. And what you said is exactly what we need to do. I agree.
Can I ask, what do second units or granny units, do those play into this equation at all? I mean, are they counted against this affordable housing?
Yes, they can definitely be accounted. There are some communities that actually deed restrict their. They generally will offer some sort of incentive, like they could offer an FAR bonus in exchange for a deed restricted second unit. Or some other incentive like that. So in the cases where they're deed restricted, they can be counted as low or very low according to the required affordability level. If they're market rate, generally the practice is to count them as moderate income units. HCD generally supports that. If a community wants to count them as lower income, then they need to actually have a rent, do a rental survey and have the data to back up a claim that it's affordable to a lower income household.
And over our last two reports to HCD for our progress annual housing element, we've reported second dwelling units that we've obtained over those 2 years. And for 2018, we already have 3 applications. So I think we'll see that they represent more and more of the moderate housing stock as we move forward.
So does that help us in terms of affordable?
Well, no, not really, because our moderate and our above moderate, you can see we're well beyond the numbers that we are required to provide. The state is really interested in obtaining more of the low and the very low.
I just had a quick question. Will the TAG be meeting after the next this next community meeting? In terms of your presentation, will the comments from that meeting come back to a TAG meeting, or will you be then into the writing of the document after that next community meeting?
That's a good question.
You're not sure if we'll necessarily be meeting, because in terms of this process, instead of bringing up something that's, has a lot of passions and on the issues of the development of this parcel, you'll have a community. You presented it to us, you presented it to ZDRB, you'll present it to the community again. At some point, you're going to write a draft, and then there'll be plenty of public discussion and open public comment at the council meeting before they would consider adopting a recommendation in the new general plan. I mean, that's all down the road.
Yes. So right now we're in the process of drafting the general plan, and then we'll take it to that public workshop in April. The feedback will continue to shape how that draft is written, and then it will come back to the draft, will come back to the TAG, and it will go back to the council and the other boards and commissions for comment on the draft. The question is whether you'd like us to come back to report on the workshop results and see if that changes any your recommendations or any of your thoughts on the process.
It would be up to the group. I would assume we'll be attending that meeting. We'll be informed by the comments there, and then we'll see.
And we will bring the draft back
and we'll
before
see
you.
the reflection of those comments in your draft, and from the draft we could make comments.
That's correct. Yes.
Comments of from this committee.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
A question. You potentially could end up with three options, none of which are going to happen because nobody wants to develop them. You know, the Catholic Church property, the North Town property, the Veterans Home, and with no options. So is there a requirement that, I mean, so that doesn't solve the problem. That may not solve the problem. It is a doorway toward potentially solving it, but it may not indeed solve it. So is the requirement that there has to be a percentage within what exists in the town, or does the town required to continue to grow with a certain percentage of low income and other homes?
There's a requirement to meet California's housing crisis and the need for lower income housing. So that's why at the time of the adoption of a housing element, we have to prove there's land that is appropriately zoned for housing. It doesn't mean that we have to develop that over the course of the housing element, but we do have to report on not meeting that each year.
But the number that's generated is based on what?
It's based on projected housing and
so based on the other
jobs.
houses that are going to happen.
It's
in the
projected
town.
population and jobs.
So they want whatever exists in the town to be balanced in some way. Whatever housing exists in the town has to be balanced in some way.
I think it's
what they're really
it's more of a regional allocation, right? And then Yountville gets a portion of it. So 5 years from now, there's a regional allocation. If Napa achieves a certain number and other cities do, then it's allocated to Yountville, and it may go up, it may go down,
Right.
I guess
So-
in theory, or so.
And the manufactured home parks are not part of that?
Well, it's all about new units. So it doesn't really matter what the affordable levels are of the existing housing stock. Shouldn't say it doesn't matter, but I mean, but it's not what's counted. What the state is interested in is building new housing.
What happens when a community is built out? Where do we
So HCD's response to that is that if you're built out, you can always build up, and you can always add more stories. And that's literally, I have heard them say that many times.
But in the manufactured home, building something new, is that considered bringing in a new manufactured home, or is it considered?
not if it's a replacement of an older unit. Only if it's a new unit.
Okay. Because I would think most of the people in the parks are in the lower income category.
Right.
Those units have already been counted, though.
Okay. All right.
So what about population, if it fluctuates? I'm sure all of California just thinks it's going to grow forever. But in looking through some of the data here, I thought I saw where from 2010 to 2015, I think that was the time, or 2005 to 2010, it looked like the population here was either stable or going down, not going up. So does that have an impact in terms of how many overall units we need?
It does. Yountville's population has been dropping with each census. It's lower and lower. But that is why the regional housing needs allocation is as low as it is for 17 units or 20 units.
So it's going
I can't
down
remember
as
what our
well.
last cycle was, but it was
17.
Okay.
it was 17 as well.
I have a question about what are the repercussions if the town's plan gets rejected, or if we don't meet what the state tells us we need to do?
If the town's plan is found not to be in compliance, and that's when I talk about HCD certifying a housing element, what they're doing is they're actually saying, we've reviewed your housing element and it's in compliance with state housing element law. If they don't find it in compliance, then the town is open to lawsuits. The town could be sued Oftentimes, it's by housing advocates will sue the town in order to force it to have a compliant housing element. And the town, and if it goes, if it gets even further down the line, the state can take away the town's permitting approval, and not allow the town to develop any housing or approve any development until there is a compliant housing element that's been adopted.
And are we concerned on a mild level, moderate? I mean, what's the DEFCON level here?
No, the town has a compliant housing element. You're making actually really good progress in meeting the RENA requirements, and really the only question comes up is if the town does lose that French Laundry site, and now is all of a sudden kind of scrambling to find an additional, to rezone an additional site. And it would be kind of better to have that thought through here and now than, when the town's under a 180-day deadline to rezone something.
I think we're very proud of what we've done and where we're positioned, but you asked a question I want to answer slightly differently. The environment right now in California legislatively, when it comes to land use legislation, there is considerable efforts underway right now, which from our position would go to undermine local authority on land use. And a whole lot of what's driving the people that are advocating for that type of changes is the belief that local governments are hindering and putting obstacles up, and that communities are not building affordable housing. So the answer in the legislature to resolve that is to further erode and take away our permit review and our approval process, and to allow by right development. So I mean, when you ask about the environment, I think that's where, when you get a report card that says these communities aren't meeting their low income housing, then they're going to start looking at that. And I mean, I've lost track, there's over 12 different bills currently working through. Some of them are very draconian, and we've already seen an erosion in our approval process. You may remember, if you've been following, now accessory development, ADUs, which you were just talking a little bit about, in some cases, if they meet certain criteria, which are fairly general, and they don't include local land use review or even talking to your neighbors, we have to approve them. And then we have to approve them, and then we notify their neighbors that we've approved them. And that's just going to be a really interesting process to see how that goes, because some of the neighbors don't know anything about it until they receive the letter from the town. So I just say that's the environment more generally on land use, and a lot of it's focusing. We talk about our population going down. Our population is going down because we have an increase in second home ownership. And then we have housing units that are being taken off the market for shorter term rental rather than long-term rental. And that's not unique to Yountville. That's happening in a lot of communities, but what's really unique in the Napa Valley is that we're forcing the working class population that our community needs to live further and further out. So the people that our businesses, our folks need, they're driving in from Fairfield, Vacaville, Sassoon, or further. And that's part of the regional housing transportation dilemma, is that, as a region, we are in a deficit position of actually having the housing to support what we're actually doing. And that's, I think, the broader challenge on the housing environment, with a focus on affordability because of the extreme price point of which Yountville is a poster child for housing cost.
I have a question, and I will be the first to admit that there's so much that I don't know and understand about this whole topic. But if I'm looking at the existing RENA requirements that hold up until 2023, we have already met and exceeded the moderate and above moderate.
Yes.
We are just shy by a handful of units in the low and very low. So I guess my question is, and tell me what I'm missing, but if we're just shy the 4 units, why would we even be having the conversation about taking 6 acres of our crown jewel of Yountville and building 40 homes?
It's based on the inclusionary housing ordinance, where only 15% of those 40 homes are required to meet the low and very low income categories. So you need to get closer up to 40 to meet that 15%. It's probably less of an issue, certainly during this current housing cycle that goes through 2022. But come 2023, when we're looking at 20 new units, 7 or 8 of which may be affordable, it presents a question that really can't be met on any other property that can be rezoned in town. Everything else is zoned residential or developed, and it is not an opportunity to meet that
So do
need.
we already know then that come 2023, we'll be required to build X number of additional moderate to above moderate?
We won't be required to build, but yes, we will be required to show that there's adequate land to accommodate those. And so, yes, come 2023, we'll be talking about the North Agricultural Parcel if it remains agricultural, yes.
We don't know exactly how many units what the requirement will be. The 20 units is what the projections look like right now in 2017. And as I said, ABAG issues new projections every 3 years, so that will be reevaluated. We'll have 2 more sets of projections before the actual numbers come on down high from the state and are given to. But I've never seen a town get 0, so probably there will probably be a requirement.
And what would be, I have one more, the impact in looking at the slide that you had up there with the 3 acres, the 2 sections, and all of the homes, I mean, that would significantly impact the residents, the existing homeowners that butt up to that property.
It would represent change conditions for those properties because they abut vineyard land now. Yes, that is correct. The reason our scaled back proposal is limited to these 2 corners was based on feedback from the ZDRB that the compact form of city development should progress outward, and that we shouldn't move to a more distant corner of that property and meet a housing need when that can remain as agricultural, and it serves to maintain existing view corridors. So looking at the feasibility of where to put additional housing on that parcel, we've scaled it back to those 2 zones.
Go ahead, Lynn.
And again, it doesn't mean that it will be developed.
It's not what I envision for Yountville.
On your map, you have underutilized in yellow. And what are those parcels?
Pull that up. So the underutilized parcels here are the orange parcels, if you can see them. And so there were 5 sites. 1, 2, 3, 5 sites. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They are all single-family homes on those sites, but they're large parcels, as you can see. So so in the inventory, it was identified how many additional single-family homes could be accommodated on those sites, and those are the underutilized sites.
So that was included in the count that we were looking at?
That is included in the count, but those are all sites that would be supporting single-family homes or second units, so they would be affordable to moderate and above moderate. They wouldn't be affordable to that lower income, which is kind of our problem.
Why is that? Why can't those types of deed restrictions be placed on those parcels if they choose to add another unit? or something like that?
So, so I mentioned earlier that there are communities that have a second unit program where they will provide some sort of an incentive, and in exchange for a deed restriction, they can be. I did one in Ross and in Belvedere. So, communities like that that are dealing with, well, not so much Ross, but Belvedere's got very small lots, and they would really like to get bigger houses. So if they can get another 15% FAR on top of what they have now, and in exchange for a second unit, well, that's a deed restricted second unit. That's something that that's been supported. Other communities, it's just not enough of an incentive. So it really always depends on what the incentive is.
But the biggest issue on those parcels and you could name the names of the people that live on them, there's only one home on the parcel now. So if they came back and wanted to put 5 homes, then the town, through the master development process, could get a 15% affordable, but it would be one of those if someone they have one home on a fairly large parcel and they want to add one other home, then it would be the town. Then I don't think anyone's saying, well, that other home we're going to force you to make it very low or very low. It's this. I mean, if they at some point were sold and someone came back and said, I want to subdivide this to 5 units, then the town would have an opportunity to have that 15% affordable or.
Right. And to be involved in the negotiation.
I don't think we would require those people right now, if they subdivided it once, we couldn't control that.
Right. The trigger is a subdivision of 5 or more parcels or a development of 5 or more homes. Some of these parcels may be able to accommodate 5-ish or maybe a couple more, but it depends on so many factors such as circulation and the size and layout of those lots. They do represent a potential opportunity. It's just so vague at this point that they're not identified as satisfying the inclusionary need.
So a comment on dilemma. It seems to me that the Catholic property and the North property, they've already gone through, you've suggested, a couple cycles, at least the Catholic property, correct? So you have also stated that at some point the state looks at that and says, it looks like you're just playing a shell game here. Or otherwise, you're saying you have the ability to develop this, but yet another 8 years went by and we haven't done anything. So we've also heard in this committee that the North property, that they don't have any idea or they don't have any plans to sell in the near future. So it seems to me we're set up in the 2 places that we've zoned to build, but unfortunately there's no real plan for anyone to sell or to build on those properties as we see it. So the question I have to you is, at some point we're going to run out of time if they continue generationally to just keep the property the way it is, correct? At some point we'll just time out, I guess, in how I understand what you're telling me.
Well, that's a new rule, and we're not exactly sure how that's going to play out, but I think that's a good assumption, yes, at some point.
So what if the North property was put into a trust, land trust? What would happen then?
If it was put in a land trust, that would supersede our local land use.
And how would the state look at that? Would the state
as not allowing that as a viable option? Right. The land trust keeps it in agricultural.
Okay.
So, of course, another opportunity to meet housing is to provide zoning that allows dwellings downtown where there's available FAR, and that's part of the discussion we've had for the V Marketplace property, 2nd or potentially 3rd floor residential. The reason that that's not counted as an opportunity in this housing element is because those properties are at their maximum FAR, and so those additional incentives would open something up. What you see on this map are the gray properties for handwritten cellars that's under construction south of Ranch Market, and also the RH property. And while one of those involves an apartment, those 2 properties have basically fallen off as opportunities off of this map.
So one last comment from me. It's kind of partners on something Joel said earlier. in our workshop that's coming up, it's going to be sort of imperative to be able to, and I wouldn't want to be you guys, but it would seem to me you would have to be able to articulate that there are state regulations in terms of timing out on these properties, because one could say, well, we already have this big Catholic Church property, so why are we even talking about the north end? But then on the other hand, as I said earlier, on the north, it could also time out generationally if it's not ever developed. So I don't know exactly how you get that out in a workshop, because it's going to look a little confusing when gray really is gray, but it's not exactly gray. It's something like gray.
50 shades of gray.
So anyway, I do think that's a good point, Joel. I mean, it's going to be hard to articulate the way, it's been presented to us. There's a lot of, overlay here, so.
Yeah, no, it's a very nuanced conversation, and it's probably more than, we'll do our best, but, we'll get the feedback that we get back.
I don't want to trivialize the process, but PJ, you said something that caught my attention, and it's, again, not to trivialize, but it's kind of a game. You mentioned it was a shell game. Putting housing on that parcel may not be my vision for Yountville either, but as Steve said, the state doesn't care what our vision is, and if the town gets into trouble, the state is going to come down on the town, and regardless of what we may have voted here or what we decide, the council may have to scramble, and they're going to have to identify a property or rezone something. Otherwise, there's going to be ramifications coming down, and they may very well. I mean, ZDRB voted 3-0. The council may supersede anything that we say anyways. And again, that property may never sell, just like the Catholic Church, or not sell. They may not choose to develop it, but this is a game, so to speak, that the state requires us to play.
Okay. I think we do have to move on some of the issues, but I just want to, unless there's other quick comments, I want to open up the public hearing on this discussion, and if there's any comments on this issue, and then are there any? Thank you.
Mike Zagorczyk, 1953, Yountville Crossroad. I told my wife that I probably wouldn't be speaking tonight. I was wrong. And by the way, I'm more than a one-issue commenter. Actually, all the issues are interesting, but I respect that the tag, it gets through all the talking, and I'll just sort of pick my moments. I had one quick question, and then hopefully a short comment after. The housing requirements that come from the state, do they come from the state directly to Yountville, or do they allocate it to the region, and then the region then allocates? Like, who are we negotiating with? Or if
well, we're not negotiating because we don't get to negotiate.
Let me say, which body is in the position? The reason I ask is because the context for my question, obviously, is to Boyd's comment, it's like the state shall come down. My parents are from Eastern Europe, and there are entire sections and towns where there is state housing, and you see this beautiful old town, and then you see the cinder blocks, right? That's not what we're going. It's not what's going to happen. But obviously, sometimes you go to the extreme to come back to reality, right? And so I genuinely hope that we don't have some kind of state housing police that's going to start arresting people. But I was curious what that process of allocation to the cities and towns on a regional level as opposed to state level.
So by state law, it starts with the state. So the state they come up with their projections for additional housing that's needed. They look at population, births, deaths, in and out migration, and jobs. And so they're making projections, and then they come up with a housing need for the entire state. And then they allocate that to what they call Regional Council of Governments. And so our region is the Bay Area. It's the Association of Bay Area Governments think there's 100 jurisdictions. It's nine counties. 9 counties. And so it goes to ABAG. And then ABAG goes through its process, and they have a board, and then they have a very complicated formula that they use to allocate the units to all of the jurisdictions, the cities, the towns, and the counties that are responsible for the housing in the unincorporated areas. And they will look at things like the availability of transit, and if you're transit rich, or if a community is elected to be what's called a priority development area, they've actually elected to take on more housing than and to develop it even higher densities because they might have a transit hub, or they're just doing that opens you up to, you get a lot more grants from the state. So they just might want the money from the state. So there's a big process. It's also about looking at population growth and job growth. But there's other factors that come into it as well as that point. And then it's allocated to all of the cities, and that's the process.
And then I just want to jump in, an additional opportunity once it sort of lands in the local level is that all the jurisdictions in an area can establish a sub-RENA. And during this last housing cycle, all the Napa County jurisdictions did, and it opens an opportunity for trading some of those units where maybe City of Napa would be willing to take on some of Yountville's units because we have nowhere to grow and they're located near transit and have these opportunities. It wasn't successful in this last round of negotiation, and everybody wound up with their original RENA number. It is something that works successfully in Sonoma County, and it may be different in the next cycle. We know that City of Napa and County of Napa negotiate as to their units as well, so it holds a sliver of hope as we move forward. So,
thank you. And then just I'm not good at keeping things short, but the quick comment is as I started to dig into this, like this process has been illuminating, and I dug into the housing element, I realized that this was really the source of a lot of what ultimately is driving many parts of the general plan, or at least the housing component, and it's really where the state is clearly the most heavy-handed in how towns develop, and I thought, I enjoy every discussion. I know you're not going to go home and sort of ride high on one person's feedback, but I genuinely enjoy the discourse and the commentary that's coming through this process. But it was clear to me that given this was such a driving force, we had the discussions up front about zoning and what to do, and now we're having a housing element, and we realized, wow, this is really the thing. I mean, from my perspective, it would have been very interesting to start with a housing element and say, let's level the playing field and understand what we're trying to do here, because it felt there was a disconnect between what some of the proposals were against what the vision of the town was, and I kept trying to reconcile, why am I hearing one thing but then seeing slides that look like something else? I don't know if that resonates or makes sense in terms of the orders and the drivers. And I genuinely appreciate that now we're able to have a conversation about, look, let's start talking about the right contingencies. Let's explore all avenues. Let's make sure that we're balancing what the town is and we're thinking of the future and not necessarily, compromising. We don't step too far ahead where we overzone because we think something's going to happen, but let's be smart about what we need to do for these contingencies. So it feels like, and I agree that it's good. Now we're getting really complicated, and obviously bringing it to the broader community is going to be its own adventure. But anyway, I just wanted to share that perspective and really hope we can continue to be creative as some of these conversations have been about finding other ways to meet the requirements. Right.
Thank you. Good. So, go ahead, Pam. I still have the public hearing open.
I just have a question, actually, about the housing overlay over the French Laundry property. How does that work, and how much control does the community have over insisting or wanting the housing overlay? If someone wants to develop the property, how much clout does the town have in applying the housing overlay?
I honestly don't have an answer to that question because our development in town is really property owner driven. And so given the fact that it is commercially zoned, a commercial application would be reviewed under those requirements. Mm-hmm. What the affordable housing overlay does is offer that property owner an opportunity if they want to develop affordable housing, and it gets them the density of housing that may make it so that it's an affordable project. But the town wouldn't necessarily require it.
Right, but do we have an opportunity in this process to state a value of that the community wants the businesses to share in the development of affordable housing? I mean, it is the workers who have to drive here that work in their establishments that we're trying to accommodate, right? So it seems like that's something that needs to be talked about in the general plan or in whatever element it belongs, to say that we see this partnership necessary between business and the community to create the housing that is required for the operation of their businesses. And they really do need to shoulder some of the burden because they're creating some of the issue.
So that's why the town has an affordable housing in lieu fee that is imposed on all developers of commercial projects. And so, let me give an example.
Well, I get about the in lieu fee, but the in lieu fee never gets the housing, or very seldom gets it.
Well, what it does is it is contributed to a housing opportunity fund that is then used when needed to purchase
other
a unit
things,
that's
yeah.
at risk, or it has to be used for affordable housing. So it provides the opportunity for the town to do so. And just this last year, the town stepped in and bought an affordable unit in Washington Park, and we were able to do so because of those in lieu fees. And so there is a requirement or an obligation that is on an applicant of a commercial property. In the case of the Bardo-Sono Hotel, with the option of developing, paying the in lieu fee or developing the units themselves, they worked with Napa Valley Community Housing for 25 units at Arroyo Grande. And so those measures are in play, and they work as incentives and requirements for commercial developers. I thought there was something else I wanted to say, but it slipped my mind.
Yeah, I'm just talking about having some language that talks about the necessary partnering with that in the housing.
Thank you. Thanks, Pam.
By the way, it feels like we're sort of imagining that low-income people will work here. That the low-income housing is people who work here. I would be curious to know, of the low-income housing that is currently available, what percentage of the people that are there are actually working here?
I've got a comment that I want to respond to the French Laundry parcel because there's some other history, Pam, that I think needs to be, and then I'll try to answer your question, Verlin, a little bit differently. The French Laundry parcel was rezoned by the town council in the mid-90s. It had been residential. One of the unique characteristics and requirement for ultimate development of that parcel is that when developed, they are going to have to provide some additional housing. It's not specific. The council back in the mid-1990s didn't define exactly what that was going to be, but that alluded to some of that. So what I would say is there has been some commitment. More recently, the town council required housing development with the Bardo-Sono construction and with the expansion of the Hotel Yountville. So we've been doing a little bit more in terms of that active partnership that you were alluding to, and we have some of the higher in lieu fees, and we've actually used that money to support the housing. And now obviously we're getting to a point where we're in little incremental. We've also been very successful with the mixed use components. Priest Ranch has a unit. We talked about the 4 units at North Block, which as a 4 unit out of a 20 unit hotel. Although the family has chose to use it, the Stewart Sellers has an apartment on it, and the recently approved Handwritten. So we've been, I think, the council and the community, also the recent when we did the rezone for Heston, that has an apartment, and Cindy Gates' renovation of the property on Humboldt was conditioned to retain a unit, an apartment. So I just want to share, there are, I think, some policies. I certainly think the nexus for talking about wanting an inclusive community, because I think the way I would answer the question, we have a nice policy in Yountville talking about the inclusiveness of the community, and that includes the social economic diversity of the community. And we talk about, you know, the people that are working in Yountville should be able to live in Yountville. Now, Verlin, we ask a different question on managed affordable. And unfortunately, the simple, we can have preference policies, but they only can go so far. So you can give preference, and typically when we have limited openings in some of the publicly managed affordable housing, and when we talk about deed restrictions, there's two types. The private property owners can maintain the deed restriction. We monitor those. They have reports that they have to do, but they're responsible for the screening, selection, marketing, whatever. And then we have a couple, Arroyo Grande, which is right adjacent, kind of kitty corner over here, is managed in a partnership with a nonprofit, Napa Valley Community Housing, and they actually manage a number of scattered projects. The other thing I would say is Yountville practices a scattered housing approach rather than clumping, you know, large numbers in one spot. I would say that most of the town's affordable, larger projects, in some cases, are better maintained than a quadrant that I'm familiar with on the north end of town, which are all market rate housing. So that's just an interesting, but by state law, we cannot exclusively limit the use of the deed restricted affordable housing. We do have a preference policy, and it generally works with you get a number of chits, and hopefully, you know, those that work get one, those that live get one, and then you have a general, you meet the income eligibility requirements. But then they would have a lottery out of that. Probably not a big surprise that we have very little vacancy in our Yountville affordable. It's very desirable. So from the publicly managed ones, we don't see a whole lot of vacancy.
I wanted to make one comment about one response to Pam's comment. There are policies in the housing element about kind of partnering with our businesses. There's one in particular that says require developers of non-residential projects to assume responsibility for a share of the workforce housing needs generated by such development. So that's just an example of one policy. It definitely is addressed in the housing element.
Yeah. Eric, can I make a comment real quick?
Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead.
So based on the information that we learned tonight, which I actually wish we would have been presented before we had the rezoning conversation, I think it would have made a little bit more sense because I think the outcome would have been different. I actually think it would be irresponsible of us not to consider staff's recommendation, and I actually think based on ZDRB's feedback, your additional recommendation or revised recommendation makes a lot of sense. It feels like we're going to get there anyway, probably in 2023, and based on Davio's point, I think allowing council to have this taken care of and dialed in already and not having to scramble with 180 days makes a lot of sense. I personally voted for the Parcel property to be rezoned, and I would vote for that recommendation again based on your revision. So I think it's really important for us to think about that. I mean, this is something that is inevitably going to happen. The French Laundry has expressed interest in developing that site. I do believe that that's something that they're already looking at. So based on that, I think it would be irresponsible for us not to consider staff's recommendation.
Let me, one moment, just go ahead and close. I think we've heard from the public. I'm going to close the public hearing, so that's accurate. So is this a discussion you'd want to have tonight, or something that might be worth us discussing after the next community workshop, where we'll get some more input from the community, and then we can see a draft, some of the draft ideas for staff, for council?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to hear the community feedback first. I think that we saw kind of the reality tonight, And I think that we need to really keep that in mind, especially as part of our job is to look towards the future. So happy to have that discussion after the community workshop once we hear their input.
I think, to me, I'm not sure that this is true, but it seems like the community has a bit of a misunderstanding, and maybe I'm the one with the misunderstanding. But, you know, when we're talking about zoning, we're not talking about taking over land and making it be something. So the owners still have the right to do what they want to do, and no matter how we zone it, the current owners get to keep it as it is as long as they want to. So, you know, they can do that if they want to. The thing is, the current owners, the current owners could, given how it's zoned, also not keep it how it is. And there's a lot of things they could do, some of which you might be very happy with, but I think the people that were concerned about the traffic going in off their street and changing the beauty might have a different feeling if they thought that a vineyard management company was going in with trucks and Caterpillars and machine shops in that area, which could be done now with the way it's owned. So nothing is going to happen, probably, but leaving it the way it's zoned seems risky to me.
I'm all in for a discussion about this, but not tonight. More tonight. It's a complicated issue, and I don't think it's an us versus them question. I think it's a discussion of how our broader community in the Napa Valley preserves our agricultural heritage and and deals with the issues that we deal with today instead of being a Santa Clara County, which requires some focus, flexibility by the communities, and that's what we've talked about. And so that's a longer discussion, and I think we should have it maybe after that we hear from the community the next community workshop. So we're at 7:45, and we have a whole item we were going to talk about other general plan elements. And so, how do you suggest we move forward tonight without being here till?
We actually don't.
Okay. Well, one moment. We have a comment from a member, board member.
I have a personal situation coming up, and I'm going to need to leave shortly. I need to be home by 8 o'clock. I don't think we can get it done then, but if you want to discuss it, if you can go on with 8 members instead of 9, okay?
Thank you. Thanks for the report. So what is your suggestion in terms of maybe our future meetings about how we would approach these other items and the matrix that you presented to us for?
So we would like to try to, we might be able to get, if we're going to 8:30, we might be able to get through the matrix. A lot of the policies and programs that are in this matrix were actually reviewed or during the land use discussion. So I think we should, I would say let's try to
maybe focus on the ones where you say that are potential new policies and not already reviewed.
And not the ones that have already been reviewed.
Conversations.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Are there, go ahead.
I have a question on the other.
We have them, okay. Okay, so we haven't, I apologize, Boyd has a question about our item in terms of the housing element. Go ahead.
Just a kind of a question or clarification on apartments or housing units put in to commercial projects. If I was the owner of the RH property and I was going to build a commercial store selling shoes, whatever, right? And as part of my development for my store, I said, I'm going to put in a low-income apartment, right? Does that go into the housing stock, right? Yes. Okay. If as a business owner or as a property owner and I was going to develop a site and said that I was going to put a low-income apartment in, I get FAR bonuses, right? Or yes? Okay.
It doesn't even have to be a low-income unit to get a housing bonus on a commercial parcel.
Okay. So if I'm running my shoe store up there and I have an apartment upstairs or whatever, is there any follow-up about who I rent it to? I mean,
Well, it
I've
depends
said that
on-
I'm going to do this, but what if I decide to use it as my weekend apartment for myself?
Well,
'Cause
that still satisfies a housing need. It would only be restricted as to income if it was actually a deed-restricted unit. Otherwise, it could be rented at market rate, used as a weekend home, or any number of things.
Okay. Because I've always thought that was a great idea that we could add housing with commercial projects, but it kind of occurred to me that it's a cute idea, but does it actually address a problem? And I think we think that it does, but it's.
Well, I think it very definitely has the potential of satisfying an apartment housing need. What we're seeing of the developers that develop the properties on Washington is that they love to have a weekend home for themselves. So it's not based on the market need. They don't need to rent it out.
But I think there's another point to your question, Boyd, is if they do declare that it is a low income, because there is a different structure, we do have a process that requires monitoring, and we go in and check, review lease agreements and things like that. I think that was part of your question. We don't get involved with those that are not deed restricted. So if it's a market rate apartment, we don't get involved. And that's why I say North Block is unique, where they have 4, 2 of which are deed restricted. We have annual reports and monitoring. The other 2 aren't. So I just want to make sure that part was understood.
Just a real quick clarification. You mentioned, Christine, I think about the land trust, and I know that exists in the county, but the land trust has jurisdiction in a town limits, in a city limits also. The land trust can be a part of a town limits inside the town?
So I'm not familiar with the land trust here, but I think that was Sandra was. Sandra was answering that question.
Parcel, if that goes to a land trust, I know that not Mount St. Louis, but Mill Hill is partial land trust, but that's not in the town limit itself. But that property we're talking about is. So the land trust can have jurisdiction within the town limits?
Well, I'm not as familiar. We don't have any land trust land within the town, but it's an agreement that the property owner makes to maintain that property, and they get tax breaks for it, so there is an obligation to keep it as agriculture, and it could apply within the town limits.
What I would say there is that's a big variable. It's not that the land trust comes in and trumps local zoning. So I mean, we'd have to look at it, and there's different. Some are conservation easements, some have deed restrictions. Some stuff actually that is put into the land trust has development components. So it's too simplistic just to say land trust and it's going to stay the way it is. I mean, it all depends on the nature. And I think it was Verlin, you mentioned the fact that, the property, we hear a lot of people talk about, and we're guilty here, though these aren't the same grapes. We show beautiful pictures of grapes. Grapes not the only agriculture. And, many of our neighborhoods that we live in were orchards and some other different types of ag. But the ag that could go on there could change over time. I mean, right now, ag is, one of the vineyard side of it is the, top grossing, but that could change. So I just think it's important when we look at that. But if it was also at some point, what I would say, if the land was to ever come into a deed restriction or an element that it wasn't going to be able to have development purposes, it probably would even warrant a broader discussion of de-annexation from the town. And because if it's not going to be developed, it's not consistent with what the zoning and standards would be. But I mean, I'm just saying that's a very conceptual, but it would something that would have to be looked at.
Yeah, I just didn't realize that the land trust could come into the town limits?
It varies, and I would just say it would have to be looked at. We'd have to see how that all worked.
They do exist in other places, like Connolly Ranch in Napa off of Browns Valley Road is city limits of Napa, but a land trust property, so it's, I think it varies. And so are there any other questions of the group related to housing, or should we move on to the last item on our agenda? Any other comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 18-1581, which is the discussion of other policies. And so, staff?
Okay, so we don't have a PowerPoint presentation for this one, but we just kind of thought we would take them one section at a time. The idea here that these are would probably be combined into a separate element because there's probably not enough for each one to be an element standing on its own, but we'll kind of figure that out as we're drafting the general plan. But we did want to start, and this was something that the TAG wanted, was to start off the general plan with an element about the community and about the residents. So these were some policies. Some of them we've pulled over from the land use, but we've added a couple of, or actually 5 additional ones. The first 3 really are to kind of get at that idea about preserving and enhancing the quality of life for the residents, improving the commercial uses that provide basic and everyday shopping for residents, good neighbor practices, and then the last 2 are about healthy eating and active living. So we wanted to get feedback on those.
So this would be part, I'm sorry, I apologize. Go ahead.
No, I was just, she was looking for feedback. Great.
Great. Great. And are there is there anything that we're missing? And do you have any ideas for additional policies?
So this would be part of, in terms of your writing of a separate element within an addition to the general plan, or did you say possibly sprinkled into the existing elements?
Right. It could potentially be, this could be the first one in the land use element, but this is really kind of broader than just land use. And so the feedback we had gotten from the TAG in an earlier meeting was that the TAG really wanted to start with an element about the residents, and that is the intent of this section here.
As I'm looking at the second one, the resident serving businesses, encourage commercial uses that provide basic everyday shopping and services for residents. So I guess what I envision with this is, let's say the hotels have tennis courts or exercise facilities or something on their property, that maybe there would be some kind of a reciprocal thing with residents that would allow them to maybe pay a fee and have use of those services as well. So I'm thinking not just necessarily shopping for things, but access to amenities.
Mm-hmm. So are we talking just about recreational facilities, or are you also like meeting facilities?
I mean, sure, yes.
I think that the scenario that you just painted is one way that a commercial business would fulfill this policy, where it says everyday shopping and services.
Okay.
That would be one of those and services.
Good, okay.
I think.
Okay, well then I like that one. Okay. I think that's a great idea.
Much like a business center.
Yeah.
We don't have any kind of a business center here in town. Can't go somewhere and fax something or make copies. Those are all things I think that are needed and necessary and useful, not only for the hotels, but for the residences.
Lynn, you're welcome to use my fax machine anytime you'd like.
I have a comment on these. These are really nice, feel-good things. I like them all. I especially like the healthy eating and living. We tried this at the Park District, and it was very successful. Healthy parks and healthy people. But these are really, to me, personal opinion only, these are really void of really any real context. When you say restaurant residents serving businesses. That's really cool, and I think most people would raise their hand, and that's what we want. Yet, we don't have that. We're not going to have a Trader Joe's. We're not going to have a lot of the things that these feel-good things provide. It doesn't mean, in my opinion, that we're not going to have them, but I just don't. I think if these were presented at that workshop, people would probably rally around the bullet points, but then again, what do they really mean? And so if our task is to envision these as policies going forward, they just seem, in my opinion, at least these, although they're totally laudable, each one of them, they just don't really seem to have a lot of context to them. They're just, I don't know. The ones that are reviewed, the code enforcement and drones and vacation rentals, those are different because they've sort of gone through a process where there's some mitigation. But the other ones, and of course I can't complain with the quality of life here. It's a pretty good place. But I guess I just want that on the record that this is more of a promotional goodwill than really a policy. These don't really seem like policies to me, per se.
I see it as sort of as a statement. The town council is the one that ends up deciding a lot of things and modifying within context of what we're writing. And I see this as sort of some global guidelines to say this is what we hear the people really want. And so if you could make decisions that fall within those lofty goals, that you're going to get enthusiasm from the town. I think that's a positive thing.
I agree.
I have just, I'm sorry, Christine.
I was just going to respond to Davio's question.
Go ahead.
Okay, or his comment, I should say. So what you said is exactly the difference kind of between a policy and a program. The policy is the overall broad statement setting a direction for what the town wants to achieve. Give some policies for the council and the boards to use. But the programs themselves is kind of where the rubber meets the road. So you mentioned like the drones. Well, that's actually a program. That's something that the town's going to do in order to achieve, in achieving a policy. So, for example, the healthy eating and active living is a broad policy. Now, a program under that some kinds of programs that I've seen that would fall under that are adopt a beekeeping ordinance, evaluate a location for a community garden, right. I mean, like specific programs. So if there are any specific programs that the TAG would like to propose that fall under these policies and would give them some additional meat to them, as you're saying, that we would certainly welcome those to add.
I have a suggestion for revising that one about the healthy eating and active living. I mean, I think it's great if our community can support projects and programs, like we were saying, a community garden or something, but I do not think that we should have wording in there that says, and regulations. I don't see us regulating people's health, well-being, and physical activity.
Actually, this is a new trend. I actually worked on a Napa Valley county-wide task force, which was called Live Healthy Napa Valley. The comment here about regulations, and I think, PJ, I appreciate what you're saying, is there's a lot of regulations that ultimately impact healthy livability. And it's not, we're talking about, for example, design standards that have complete sidewalks. Because if you don't have bike paths, you don't have safe sidewalks, people won't walk. So I want to say maybe we're being too simplistic because somebody is inserting what type of regulations they think. But when the town puts design standards, do we encourage parks that have amenities? So, I mean, those are the types of things that fall under regulation. So I just want to say maybe we can add some oomph. And actually, Christine, there's some stuff out of that report that we might be able to include on some programs because, for example, our parks, we've actually changed some of the things in the programming we do in our Parks and Rec. And there was really, and to Davio's point, I think you mentioned in your background with, it became a reality that we're adopting general plans, but some of these things that we need to be, because, if you want people to walk from A to B, they need a place to walk. And if you want bike paths, you need, so I mean, part of it is there are things that can be in our general plan that will encourage healthy behavior, beekeeping, community gardens, although I would already struggle my little mind was already trying to figure out where the space would be, and I was drawing a blank, but we'll get through that one. But I do think there's, just to show, maybe we need to talk about a little more to do that, to address your concern.
Well, because your explanation makes perfect sense, but when I'm reading this, it sounds like we're regulating how much physical activity, right? Yes.
Because trust me, if we were trying to regulate how much Steve would eat, we'd have a real problem. But I think it's important, and I think, we learn a lot from you all, the public comment, on how things are being received and how we can learn to do something to present. I mean, a big takeaway tonight is an aha moment, which is because the housing element was one that was not in play, we chose to present it later, and you guys are all saying, oh, this is a great background that would have been nice to have a few months ago. Mm-hmm. Well, when we talk about presenting our story to the community as a whole, I can pretty much guarantee you we're taking stock of how do we set the table. And maybe that's a helpful way to set the table because it builds into some of these other things. So to me, that's when I heard you say something like that. I'm like, ooh, there's a way we can get in front of this because it's really not meant that way. There's enough other agencies that will regulate how much X and Y, but it's the things that we have control of to try to improve that healthy lifestyle.
Maybe a good suggestion for PJ suggested is remove regulations and make it more specific what we're talking. We're talking about public and private policies, projects, and programs because if we can, we'd want to encourage commercial businesses to be involved too. So supporting public and private policies, projects, and programs that improve community health, well-being, and physical activity removes this kind of regulation, but says in the end, if it's a public policy, it's going to be a designed and regulated policy, and if not, but it also invites the private businesses to participate as well. So that's my only suggestion to make it.
I
No, it's
stepped
okay.
on your comment before, so.
It's all right. I didn't hear completely the difference between policy and program because we're looking at a policy of vacation rentals which uses the term prohibit, and yet we're looking at drones, and there was a lot of strong language in the discussions around drones, but it's talking about evaluate. Or up on resident surveys, encourage. So I'm not sure the different verbiage as it contains, or as it applies to a policy or a program. And so I just help me understand that.
So the policy, so for vacation rentals, let's take that. The policy is to prohibit the short-term vacation rentals in residential zoning districts. If the town did not have an ordinance that that prohibited those short-term vacation rentals, then there would be a program under that said adopt an ordinance to prohibit short-term vacation rentals. So the program itself is how are you going to implement the policy? The policy setting the broad overall. I wish I had another word to define policy with other than policy, but I'm at a loss.
It might be the difference between, are you answering the question of why or how? A policy is a good why do we want to do this? And the program is the how. And that's why it might get a little more specific into things.
I have another comment on quality of life and community. Somewhere in here, I think there should be some mention of all access. These are all, again, really good, laudable policies or programs, but there's no mention of any kind of disability, even though I know that it's implied in a lot of this, and I know that in our parks and our efforts to make our community more accessible, we do a pretty good job. but there's no mention of that here, and I think that would be remiss to leave that out.
That's a great comment. And even, something that just talks about, all age groups and...
Yeah, like the town has a current ADA transition plan that you see sprinkled every single year in the budget, and the CIP, you can see references to the ADA transition plan. A program now underneath quality of life could be continue to have an ADA transition plan. Don't have something like that go away. Always make ADA a priority.
Good. That's very good. Go ahead. Sorry. I'll go ahead and open up the public hearing. Pam, if you'd like to give a comment on this item.
I was just wondering, under this policy, resident serving businesses, if a program could take a look at our current regulations of home occupations, because sometimes the only way to get a resident serving business is to do it from your residence. And there are some parts of that whole procedure that could be changed in order to encourage resident home occupation.
Is there anything specific? Just curious.
Well, right now we say that there's an office which has a very small fee and a quick in and out signing the papers, and then there's a major home occupation which requires the council and a lot of paperwork. But I feel like there is a mid-range level that could be considered where there's a visited home occupation of, say, under 4 people a day or something, that would require less fees, less hassle, and still maintain all of the other requirements, which is you can't make noise, you have to have adequate parking, you can't have smells or whatever that disturb other residents, but that the actual impetus to start a business is not quelled before you actually, make the application. And there's no guarantee when you go to the town council that your money that you've already put up front will be wasted or not, because, there's not a sure thing like it is for an office. So.
Excellent. Thank you.
So will that involve maybe adding to that policy of encouraging commercial and home occupation uses, but we already have a home occupation program, so would it mean maybe suggesting a program that would be, or to evaluate our home occupation program to encourage businesses that meet all the other goals, as Pam talked about, protecting against sound and noise and,
Yes.
and traffic congestion. And
It's looking at the current regulations and seeing whether those are a good fit in obtaining these resident-serving businesses, or whether greater flexibility in creating new categories would work. So we have good feedback on this to know how to
we're
proceed.
considering maybe language for a program.
Yeah, program language, yes.
Okay. Are there any other comments on this item through the public? I'll go ahead and just close the public hearing on this item, on this particular discussion of the community and quality of life. Are there any other comments from the group? So remind us again, in terms of this language, you'll work on this language and we'll see it come back in your draft document as a part of the overall document in the maybe early stages of that document?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Should we move on to historic resources then, or?
Sure. The historic resources, actually, all of these were reviewed with land use. The idea was to pull them out into kind of a separate discussion. We've got a lot of background material on historic resources and the importance of that heritage here in Yountville. So unless anybody had any additional comments on those.
I have a question, maybe. I recall some months ago, it was on the table initially because we did not replace the fence at Vandeleur Park, and I think the town was looking at taking those funds and combining them with other private funds to put a new, more appropriate historic gate up at the cemetery. And I know that I'm not quite sure exactly what happened, but I know that didn't end up coming to fruition. So would something like that fit into this policy or program in the preservation ordinance? Or I'm just wondering if there's
Well, there's one I can answer easier. Conceptually, I'm going to say yes, because it would be, the idea would be that we identify programs, activities that support historic preservation. So maybe we can broaden that a little bit. And I would say that the thing that you talked about certainly reflects the interest of the council. The bad news that I have is that the board of the Yountville Cemetery Association has had infighting, and at this point they have not accepted the money, and at this point it's not likely that they're going to go forward, and I'm not sure that the vendor that they had originally worked with would probably do the project at this point. So there's external factors that are going to be responsible for what I think many in the community thought was a positive thing.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments from the committee on historic resources? One thing I would encourage you, other than I assume this is commercial and residential, that consider at some point, we look at those policies to look at the bridges in town, because some of them are older and are stone structures and are beautiful historic resources. So, are there any comments in the public on the historic resources section? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and we'll move to arts and culture.
Okay, so for arts and culture, we have a new policy that we put. The other two of them, the programs were reviewed, and then we have an additional new program. Comments? Anything else that we've missed?
Are there any comments? They all look very good.
Mm-hmm.
No comments from the group. I'll open up a public hearing. Is there any comments from the audience on this item that we're reviewing? Thank you. I'll close the public hearing. Any other direction for us on this, or will we see this as a part of some form as well as a separate element, maybe a shorter one, but somehow within our general plan update?
Yeah, we have to come up with a creative way to put these together. But
There must be other communities too that have somehow, hopefully, done this as well. It'd be interesting to see.
yeah, it might be just a separate section in kind of a quality of life, community and quality of life element, and then these could all be sections within that element, and that
element.
as an optional element.
I like that.
Good.
That's kind of where I was heading. Yeah.
Could be a great lead to the document too. So that's where we're looking at quality of life for the community. And good. All right. The next item would be the tourism and economic sustainability. Oh, Davio, do you have a?
Sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
I just wonder, did our arts commission, did they weigh in on this at all? Did they have a look?
Not yet.
Oh, but they will.
Yeah, eventually all these policies are going to be shared, just like land use was shared.
Because they may want to add something to this too, I'm thinking.
Yeah, you're seeing it first, but yeah, woohoo. But then after you see it, yeah, can be shared with the version.
Thank you.
Don't spoil it for me.
All right, tourism and economic sustainability.
Most of these, I think all of them except one, are actually new policies and programs. And these are really just kind of a lot of best practices that we kind of gleaned from other general plans, and then, kind of what was appropriate here for Yountville.
I just have one comment on this section, at least the first part of it. For the most part, all of it is very good. There's one word that kind of bothers me that doesn't really fit into all the other ones, and that's using the term upscale.
I had a feeling.
I think is a kind of is not a word that I would want to apply to everyone in town, and that's not in a derogatory way. I just think that that's an extraneous word that implies a little too much uppityness.
We could just take that out, really.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's
a great comment. Thank you.
The couple things on the last page. I really appreciate the town and staff suggestion about the partnership with the Chamber of Commerce. I think that's fantastic and goes to the point of us working together to enhance the quality of life in town and our economic viability and sustainability. Under the special events piece, I'm not sure it makes sense to specifically call out some of these special events because 10 years from now, we might not be doing those. They might be different. For instance, some of them listed here we've evolved and kind of have moved on from, and we just got a brand new event that's really fantastic that I hope is here for a very long time, which is the Yountville International Short Film Festival. And it's absolutely fantastic. But so just forethought on that, maybe just not calling them out individually.
Could it fold into that item on just the Chamber of Commerce in general to say to partner with, including the Chamber for special events or something and just...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I like that. We, partner on all those events, including the
Right.
Short Film Festival. So, yeah.
Without just calling out that, because you're right, it's transformative year after year, so. Other comments?
I have a comment or a question on the last, where it says workforce housing. That sounds like something that is already addressed in the housing element.
It is. It is already addressed in the housing element, but the idea here is that because we're talking about the business, the economic sustainability, and how important workforce housing is to the economic environment. It's not necessary that we include it here because you're right, it is in the housing element, but sometimes it's nice to kind of pull the various pieces together.
But given that that's kind of regulated, coming dictated more by the state in terms of how many units and the affordability level and everything, I just question the need for that and to have a policy specific to that.
We can definitely take it out.
I'm not sure it's relevant unless, as maybe Pam mentioned earlier, unless the statement speaks to a collaboration between the town and businesses in some way, then it either that's where the direction you want to go or just leave it out. It either speaks to that or not, or it doesn't belong. It belongs in the housing element. So
sounds like we should take it out.
I appreciate the business support policy. I have collaborated with the town before with my business, and they have helped with the success of my business, and I'm glad that's in there. And I hope to continue to work with the town.
I have a comment on economic sustainability, which I think is a wonderful thing. I wish it would work. This policy seems kind of directly or diametrically opposed to what just happened with the water and sewage increases. It says that the community service and infrastructure needs are met through tax revenues generated by a high-performing economy. Now, the only reason I bring this up is because if this went to a workshop, a lot of people felt that the way the whole assessment by the council came down sort of eliminated this actual, or at least in part, some of this policy in that, tot money really wasn't going to be used, wasn't really even discussed that much. So I wonder, is this just opening the door to some controversy here, or should we just look the other way, or what do we do?
I think it will.
No, actually, I think that's a valid comment, and I think, I'm in looking at this, I think when one looks at it, you're going right to TOT as the tax. There's sales tax. There's a whole, and I think, and there's also utility rate revenue, because we've also had to design a rate structure. So I think what we probably need to do, actually, Davio, based on that reaction, is be more descriptive about the various tax structures, TOT, sales tax, property tax, and utility rate revenue and other sources, because it really is, they all go together. One last comment I don't want to necessarily go back on the workforce housing. There is a different reason that I think there is I'm just going to say a little bit to put this in here, because you heard from Pam talk about earlier, this helps to reinforce that this is partially a business commitment, not just the town. But the other thing is, many communities are having a dialogue about, well, we can't find employees to work in our businesses. Now, right now, Yountville and we're actually a great poster child, because we don't have a lot of working people. If you kind of looked at our distribution, we don't. And we don't have a lot of people that work in Yountville that live in Yountville. So we're dependent, and I think if you look at this, it's workforce housing, employee, but I'm just saying, I think there might be a basis that we can work on, because again, it comes back to that sustainability of the business model, because if we don't have employees working in our business, then you don't need to worry about the economic success of your businesses. And I will tell you right now that the city of Calistoga leaders in their business community, they're having a world of hurt, because, they're trying things like busing people in from Santa Rosa. And, and they're really trying to figure out how, or are they going to end up paying a premium over what other places are paying? So it's broader than just the idea of housing. And I think it brings in the comment that all of this should be involved in that employee workforce housing as a part of that element, and it's not just, we've got the complicated part in the housing element about the requirements to do it, but here you're really talking about the community spirit and the relationship with the business community and the social responsibility to do it would perhaps be one way of looking at what this element language is attempting to do.
Steve, thank you for your comments, because we went through this briefly, but I think it is something, the issue is really the wording. It has to speak to the relationship, between the businesses and the fact that I assume the assumption that ended up there is that in order to continue to have economic stability and tourism in this community, we have to have workforce to provide those services. And so, thank you for your comments, and for Pam's comments earlier too. I think it's something that makes sense that we spend some more time on it, so that it belongs there in that point in that part of the element. Thank you.
But I think that goes beyond just Yountville, because the workforce in general, from construction, most of our crews are moving even farther than Fairfield, Sassoon, and everything else, because that property has gone up. So we have guys that are driving much farther because Napa is not affordable, and Yountville there's nothing for that. So it's a broad spectrum of conversation that we have to have, because the workforce that drives our economy has to drive so far, which even lowers their income far. So it's very definite. I think it needs to be a part of our ongoing discussion.
Towards economic stability, correct.
Yeah, I agree. If we could look at adding some language that includes business and how it relates to employees in town and them being able to live here, I think that would be great.
Thank you, Whitney. Okay, are there other comments? Let me go ahead and open a public hearing on this item. Are there any comments from the public on the tourism and economic stability, sustainability, and stability?
Mike Skorsek. I just wanted to comment on that last point. I think that with the spirit of the housing element and finding creative ways to meet the state requirements without having to compromise, obviously, the vision, that, yeah, the language around this to say, encourage businesses to create an environment or housing for the workforce is yet another way we could, within the town limits, actually meet some of the housing requirements. So it seems like there's kind of a potential win-win. So I would second kind of coming up with that language in the spirit of remaining creative on how we meet some of these requirements versus, expansion.
Good. Thank you. There's no other comments. I'll close the public hearing. Bring it back to the group. Are there any other comments on these items or suggestions? Good discussion, because I think we've made some good, creative and good comments for staff to review. So, seeing no other comments, then maybe we'll move past this to item. If that's okay, we'll move to item 7. We feel like we're completed this discussion on the other elements?
Yes, we are done with all of the elements.
Good. All right. So let's move to item 7, commissioner and staff comments, reports, or any comments for anyone, questions about future meetings or anything you'd like to share?
So it looks like with the work that we got through with all of the elements, that it makes sense to take April off while we take time now to draft the general plan and go to the community workshop, and we'll come to you sometime after that to review the results and a draft plan.
To remind us, what date is the community workshop?
Scheduled for April 26th, but that is subject to change. We're trying to pull some items together to make sure we meet it.
Okay. Are there any other group meetings between our meeting today and the 26th, just for, even though the
Yes.
website is is clear and there's a lot of information there, anything you could report on?
March 27th, we're having a study session with the town council. That will be the second of 2. And then the next will be the workshop on the April 26th.
And you don't have a deadline or a date yet at the Veterans Home? Is that still?
Oh, we do, yes. So on the 25th of April, we have 2 special workshops. One is with the Veterans Home and one is with the business community.
And I'm sorry, what was that date again with the veterans?
The 25th.
25th, sorry. Thank you.
Where were those?
So the Veterans Home meeting is at 2, scheduled for 1 hour. It's at Grant Hall at the Veterans Home facility. And then the business community meeting is that same Wednesday afternoon, starting at 5 at Yountville Community Center.
Remind us, Nathan, again, the website where we can find all this information.
Does everyone want to say it together? Okay, it's go to envisionyountville.com, and right at the top at meetings and news, click on it. You have a calendar of every event from March 8th to August 18th. Just everything in between.
Thank you.
Yep.
Are there any other comments?
The town council meeting is, are we encouraged to go to the vets home meeting and the business meeting and the council meeting, or
You can come to what you want to.
where is the council?
Yes, come to the council one. There was only 2 of us there last time.
Okay, I have 327 for the council. Is that at the?
You were there, right?
And it's at 1 o'clock. It will be at Community Hall.
I've got March 27th as a Tuesday.
It is a Tuesday.
Oh, it is?
Okay.
All right.
At 1 o'clock, you say?
1 p.m.
1 to 4.
Thank you. Oh, right. Yes, I agree.
Other comments?
I'm glad you concur
Okay,
with the
Davio?
Almost reluctantly, I bring this up because I don't want to keep people here longer. But I just feel compelled after our subcommittee meeting on the vision statement. I heard something there and I've been thinking about it since then. And that's for just our group. Do you think that we met the goals that you personally had about envisioning the future? When I think about that, I think there's been tremendous discussion. I think that everybody is passionate. I think everybody's in. But I wonder, do we all feel that that this is really what we thought this committee would be like? And why I bring that up is because, for me, I think, if we look to the past as a window to the future, of which we're supposed to envision things, and with all deference to having to write all this stuff up, I understand that these matrix allow a report to be generated, and that's the purpose. But to just us, did we accomplish what you thought we were going to accomplish? Or are there things that perhaps we were led along a path so that we could create a document, but did we miss something? Is there a point to have a discussion amongst ourselves in an open setting where we kind of evaluate this process for ourselves? Did we really envision the future? Did we really get there? Did this process really help us do that? Of course it did. But do you feel that this was the significant event that you are all sitting here and giving your time for? So I thought I'd just bring that up. I don't really have an answer. I know how I feel about it, but perhaps between now and the next meeting, I don't know, maybe if you think you should think about it, maybe this would be the time, because aren't we getting pretty close to the end? Yeah, a draft's coming, yeah, hopefully. So I just wanted to put that out there because I think, for me anyway, I think there's still some room for some investigation on that future that we're trying to identify. So
I think what maybe you're suggesting is almost for us to have a discussion after the draft of the general plan is written, and some time between when the draft is written and really for us to be able to read it before we come back as a tag. And it's almost a debriefing. It's almost looking at us and then us giving our last comments to council as a tag, whether we feel like we've achieved what we're...
Or did we forget something? Did we miss something? Is there
And
something that the community we heard at a meeting, or the veterans home, or we thought about, where maybe we didn't take the future quite far enough?
I think it's a good suggestion as that type of debriefing is kind of that last discussion, because I always look at this document. The general plan is like the Constitution. It's basically a living document, and so it's always forming, it's always changing. What we're trying to do is vision for the future, and it's not a stagnant document that won't change, even though it may not formally change in 20 for hopefully not as long as 20 years again, but it's a good I think that's a good suggestion.
It's an opportunity that you have to review the draft, or since we've completed the work reviewing the elements, it's something that we could bring to you in April. We don't have to take a month off. We can take a month talking about the vision, the future, whatever we missed, and that could be useful in drafting the general plan. So there are different places we can put in this element.
Well, I think the reason I think that maybe waiting till after the workshop, because I'd sort of like to ask the community that question. Do you think that, from what you've seen, what you've heard, is this what you thought it would be? Is this the direction of the Envision group that you wanted them to take? Did we miss something? I think that's what you're trying to capture in a workshop, and you've done a really good job, in my opinion, but I just wonder if it's stated in that way, then we have their input, then we come back after we have the draft. I don't know. I think that.
Okay.
My sense is, though, that I almost feel like we're talking about a first draft of a document. We're editors, or we're, until, I think the workshop's good, but until I have something on paper and in front of me that I can read that is basically a draft of the document, I feel like we'd almost be, I think we've had a good process where we went through matrices and sheets, but until we see a draft and see it, I don't think we'll be able to make that valuable evaluation until then.
You're right.
Yeah.
I agree, and I think, Davio, I love that whole point. I think it's fabulous, and I can't wait to have that discussion. And I actually think we should pose that question to the community, but I think we should do so after they've read the draft, because I think it's going to be too hard for them to contribute.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
I think there'll always be a fear that draft is like the final statement, and there's not an opportunity to comment. But this is a living process. The community will be able to. There'll be public hearing after public hearing for the review, but we'll have a valuable input when we're looking at after we've read that document or that first draft of that document.
Right, and Davio, you also mentioned this process is almost over. I think we're looking at through really at least end of year, so there are months and months ahead of us and multiple chances to look at the draft plan.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
You're still going to see plenty of this group.
Okay.
I have this one.
So we're looking at a community event in April, and then right now a tag meeting in May. Then is that what you're suggesting? Just for public, unless something changes dramatically, we're looking at another
feasible,
tag
yes.
meeting in May.
May.
All right.
Maybe June.
Thank you, everyone, for your comments tonight and for the public's comments. We're on item 8, adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.